Carolyn Dube here, and welcome to today's play. What am I going to be doing? Well, I am going to be comparing distress crayons and gelatos. Now, I've gotten this question a lot after my last video about distress crayons, where I was basically just exploring and playing with them. Now, in this one, I'm going to be doing this as scientifically as I possibly can so that I can see and so that you can see how they behave side by side. Now, when I say scientifically, let's not make any pretense here that this is some kind of rigorous academic study. This is all about the play for me, but I am going to be smart and keep the gelatos on one part and the distress crayons on another so that we can see how they each behave. Got my stencil down there. I've taped it in with some repositionable tape in my art journal so it won't move. And I am just going to draw with the distress crayon here loosely in that open space. I'm going to grab a baby wipe and then I'm just going to smear it and rub it around to fill in. And then I'm going to grab the gelatos and do the same thing, but this time I'm going to work on the top row. So I'm going to keep the distress crayons at the bottom and gelatos at the top. And when I bring in the baby wipe to smear it around, I'm going to pick a clean, unused portion of the baby wipe. That way I can keep this test as proper and scientific as possible. Okay, this really isn't going to be scientific in any way, shape, or form, but hey, I do want to keep them separate. So now I'm just going to keep doing this for all of the colors, keeping the distress crayons at the bottom and the gelatos at the top. Same technique with different colors. Now, the colors as I matched up, I did the oranges that I had that were closest together. Clearly, the gelatos orange is a different shade, hue, tint, whatever you want to call it, intensity, than the distress crayons one. So you got to kind of keep that in mind that these colors are not exact Pantone matches for each other. It's really just kind of what I had. So both of them react about the same way to the baby wipe, so no real difference there between them. The only difference that I've really noticed at this point of comparing them is that the distress crayons are a little bit softer, creamier, like a really smooth lipstick. The gelatos feel a little bit drier, a little bit firmer, for lack of a better word. Now, when I put them on, they both still give you lots of color. They both spread around. So to me at this point, they're very similar. It just kind of depends on what feel you like the most. The distress crayons, it was kind of nice to have a little bit thinner tip to have in there to get into places, but clearly it's not slowing me down that much on the gelatos either here, so. Now, when I started this comparison, I was pretty sure there had to be some major differences between the two of these. And so far, I'm not really finding any major differences. Definitely a little bit of preference to it. If you like things to be creamier when it goes on, that kind of stuff, the distress crayons are creamier in that sense for ease of application, a softness. But for all practical purposes right now, they are neck and neck. They're doing similar things, reacting in similar ways to the baby wipe. Now, when performing experiments, I have to keep it really simple for me to keep track of what's going on. So I've got 5 rows of these circles here on my alternating circle stencil from Stencil Girl. So that's an odd number, and I've got an even number of supplies here. So to keep it simple for me, I am just going to put all distress crayons right along the middle so that I can keep track that distress is the bottom 3 and gelatos are the top 2. Is it totally scientific? No, but it's totally the way I have to do it for me to actually remember what I'm doing because, well, otherwise I'm not going to remember. Now, my plan was to just let it sit overnight and come back the next morning, but I kind of got distracted and pulled away by a couple of things. So it's been about 3 days since I've done this. So this stuff has had lots and lots of time to dry, cure, set up, whatever you want to call it. It's just been sitting here on my counter. And I'm going to give it the white glove test and see how these things still smear. So that's what the distress looked like. And now I'm going to bring in a fresh Kleenex. Yeah, that's my version of white glove. And that's what the gelato looks like. So both of them have a little bit of color come up if you rub them with something that's white. Well, those were the oranges in the orange color. So let's see if, like the blues, do the same kind of thing. So there's the distress with the blue. And then here is the gelato with the blue. And yeah, about the same coming up from both of those. So on that aspect, they seem to be curing to about the same level. Now, the parts that are super thick on the edges where I've got big chunks of the crayon or the gelato there, yeah, those smear, and they smear for both of them. It doesn't matter which one it is, they will both still smear. So after this test, they're running pretty much neck and neck at this point. Now, it was totally an oops to let them sit this long to cure up. So what I'm now curious about, by the way, in every oops, is an outstanding opportunity presenting suddenly, because now I'm going to see how well this stuff reactivates after it's had a lot of time to dry. So I'm taking a fresh baby wipe and I'm doing all of the yellow on the distress there. And yeah, the color still smears. You have to give it a little bit of a rub there to get it to smear, but it still does react to the water and smear. When I did the orange, I had to rub it a little bit more to get it to smear. And anywhere that I've got big chunks of it, that area did reactivate more with the wet baby wipe. But on some of these, I'm not getting a ton of color smearing with the Distress crayon. So it seems to have dried in a fairly noticeable way compared to how much it would have smeared, say, right after I did it. And the more pressure I use while doing this, oddly enough, the more stuff that will smear around. But I'm using a fair amount of pressure on the Distress crayons here to get that color to move around. Well, now when I take a fresh baby wipe and head up to the gelatos, do I have to use the same amount of pressure? And the answer is no. I'm actually using less pressure on the gelatos. They seem to be reactivating in a big way to the wet baby wipe, more so than the Distress crayons. So as I'm going to try this on different colors and see if what's happening is just for one color or if it works for all of them. And I gotta say, this is a pretty small difference in my opinion between the Distress and the gelatos. On the yellow, as I do this one right here, you're going to see that a ton of the yellow starts moving around, that the circle that I had there almost completely disappears. What I don't know is if that's because I had a lot more gelato there than I did when I was doing the Distress, or if it's really reactivating more. No way for me to know, since this is not a rigorous scientific study of these. This is me playing around in my art journal. But so far, this is probably the only area where I can say it feels like there's a difference between them. And is it a huge difference? Absolutely not. It is not a major difference. I used them in big areas on a stencil, but now I'm going to really zoom in here and see if it works clearly with a small detailed stencil. So what I'm doing is just wiping the Distress crayon right on top of the stencil. I'm not getting it in there very well at all, but then bringing that baby wipe in to push it in and move it around and get it to fill in. When I lift up the stencil, I have a very crisp and clear stenciling job. That is a very generous amount of the Distress crayon there to keep it that opaque, and it also kind of raises it up, so I get a little extra texture too. That worked with one color. Let's see if it works in a similar way with a different color. So still with the Distress, gonna scribble a bunch of it on top of there, clearly not getting into all the nooks and crannies on the stencil, but that's okay, I don't have to. I am gonna bring in a baby wipe, and that's gonna push in the Distress crayon right into the crevices, and I'll actually get a very, very crisp image with this, especially for as detailed a stencil as that is. And the stencil that I'm using for this, it is from Stencil Girl Products, and it's called Fridge Poetry. Wow, tongue-tied on that one. So those are the Distress. Let's see if this works the same way when using gelatos. Because so far, pretty much these things have been running pretty neck and neck in what they do. Slight variations, but not big variations between them. So I'm going to grab another word up there, and this time grabbing that gelatos, and I'm going to use the exact same technique. I am going to rub it across the top, not filling in very well here, but just making sure there's a bunch of that stuff on there. Then taking a baby wipe and pushing it into all the detailed areas of the stencil. And when I lift it up, yep, it works just the same way that the Distress crayons did. So what's the final decision? What's my final call? Distress or gelatos? Which one wins? How are they different? Yeah, they're not that different. Very similar in what they do and how they react to the baby wipe and on the art journal page. And the colors are both vibrant and wonderful. The Distress crayons, a little bit creamier. So if you like creamier, they win on that one. And if you want something that reactivates to water more so over time, the gelatos seem to win on that one. So not a great deal of difference in my opinion between the two of these things. So either one you want to play with, they were both great to work with, both very colorful. I enjoyed them both. So in my opinion, you can't lose with either one of them. Well, thanks for joining me for this very colorful play today. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you know of somebody that you think would enjoy a little play in their day, I'd be really grateful if you shared this video with them. Now, if you'd like some more play, want to see more of what I'm up to, I've got a blog called colorfuljourney.com where I have all sorts of colorful things, as well as a free workshop called Permission to Play, and a newsletter that comes out about every couple of weeks. And in that newsletter, there's always a free download or some kind of exclusive goodie for you. So take a look at all of it over on the blog. Thanks so much for being a part of this colorful journey.